Welcome back. I'm Olivier Crépin-Leblanc, chair of ISOC UK, Internet Society UK chapter. And I'm joined by my colleagues, Sheetal Kumar from Global Partners Digital and Ben Brackley from Tech UK. Now you see the three of us, had you attended all 3 days, you would have found that I ran the first day, the second day was run by Sheetal, and the third day today was run by Ben. And we're here to try and give a quick wrap up of what's happened in the past 3 exciting days of UK IGF. It's certainly been, for me, a new experience. First, because of course it's 3 days rather than just one, but also because of the variety of topics that have been touched on. The way that we thought we'd do it is to perhaps each one of us go through some of the topics that were dealt with and addressed on the day that we were convening, and then afterwards open up the floor for comments, questions, etc. And there are 2 ways. I think by now you probably know how to do it. So you can, of course, use the chat function to chat with everyone and chat with each other. But there's also a Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. And if you click on this, you'll be able to type in the questions and comments that you'd like to make. You can also up some questions that you see or comments that you see so that they get treated first. And the powers that be that shall remain nameless will prompt each one of us to answer them or comment, depending on how the situation goes. This is meant to be half an hour long. It could be shorter. If there really is crazy discussion on this, then yeah, I don't mind staying in a bit later, but maybe not. In any case, I guess we can start with the first of the 3 days. You can see in the chat the comments and questions has been opened now. So the first day, that was on Tuesday, which felt like a year ago. It all started out with Lillian Edwards from Newcastle University, who did a keynote and addressed a number of very important topics, among which I guess the first thing she looked at was the dangers posed by state-sponsored contact tracing apps, extended private sector surveillance in the workspace and on campuses, and by digital IDs in the public health context. And specifically, she demonstrated how these different surveillance technologies pose privacy and speech assembly concerns. Then there was a panel on building trust in digital identity, and it discussed the importance of ensuring that digital identity systems are trustworthy and how COVID has shown a spotlight on the digital identity privacy and security. How would you regulate the ecosystem beyond those who have direct control over, who you have direct control over? How do we broaden the conversation out to the public and wider stakeholders, and what terminology we should be using? Do we refer to identity, or do we use simpler language? That was a well discussed session. I'm going to try and summarize because we haven't got that much time, but I thoroughly recommend it. Going forward, the panelists suggested that we need less talk and more bold leadership to implement a digital identity, that we need to think about the end result, and not what do we need to know about the person themselves. That with the future of technology becoming more intertwined with physical devices, we're going to get huge centralized power. Now, how do we mitigate this power? And also that we need clear transparency and ethics, as well as clear public education, a clear public education roadmap to counteract negative media. After that, after the lunchtime break, Henrietta Hesteisen had a keynote for us. We heard how the IGF should also be multi-stakeholder, multi-sectoral, and multidisciplinary. She highlighted how inclusion is not easy, especially in the current times now, where there are no more face-to-face meetings and everyone has to meet online. It's both an asset, an opportunity, but also difficult to deal with. And it certainly can add noise and complexity, but it adds understanding and relationships which can develop more robust policy. She argued that we need to package national and global IGF outcomes to make them more user-friendly. So you see, there is some kind of a pattern here, make things more user-friendly. And then finally, the last session we have discussed the definition of digital inequality where there are systematic differences about who benefits and who doesn't, and that there were multiple drivers for digital inequality: poverty, social economics, familiarity, and a sense of belonging. Digital inequalities were exacerbated by COVID and its subsequent lockdown, and it's something we need to address, since it looks as though we're in this for the long term rather than just a passing phase. And Ellen argued that we need to focus on the outcomes rather than just measuring success in terms of inclusion, such as access and skills training. We also heard of international examples outside the global north, from India and from South Africa, which is great because, as you know, we've had turnout from people across the world, not just the UK. So that was the first day, which I kind of remember from the notes. Passing it over to Sheetal for the day 2.
Thank you so much, Olivier, and to everyone who's joined us over the last few days. Congratulations to everyone in the steering committee and the organizers for a successful online UK IGF. So we discussed 2 very important topics yesterday on day 2 of the UK IGF, and it sounds like some of those key themes, Olivier, came through in our sessions as well, that you mentioned around focusing, not just on processes, but also or on measurements, but also on outcomes, and having broad kind of holistic approaches. So we started the day with a keynote by the Minister of State for Digital and Culture, and she gave us an update on 3 main policy areas: UK digital strategy, the UK data strategy, and online harms legislation. She encouraged people to get involved in those, especially because she emphasized how important it is for the policies to have the perspectives of a broad range of stakeholders included. We also discussed, of course, how the COVID pandemic has increased reliance on digital technologies in the UK, but how challenging that is from a range of perspectives. It's not just about connecting people or giving people technology, but also how they need the skills and they need a certain type of connectivity. So all of that needs to be reflected in work going forward, making sure that there's, like you mentioned, a really inclusive approach to not only connecting people, but having abiding by those principles of equality and ensuring people are not left out. And that need to consider all of these different elements was also reflected in the discussion we had on algorithmic transparency, which has been very mediatized in the UK over the last few months. And some of those topics came up during that session, which was chaired by Carly Kind from the Ada Lovelace Institute. It was a really interesting session. There was a lot there around putting transparency into practice and all the principles that should underpin algorithmic processes, transparency, accountability, and fairness, and how you can do that throughout an algorithm's life cycle, but also the importance of placing algorithms in the broader context, and really considering how important humans are, and how paramount humans are in any kind of decision that implicates algorithms. There was quite a lot of detailed discussion on the relevance of tools like pilots and impact assessments and public registries of algorithms, and the importance of feedback mechanisms from the get-go in designing these types of in designing algorithms. And so I think there's a lot there that we can take forward. And then following on from that very important topic, we had a keynote from Professor Miles Allen from the University of Oxford, who kicked off proceedings for the afternoon on the internet and the environment. And he used the IPCC's 1.5 degrees report, which he co-authored, to really highlight, what the main challenges are, and to position the tech sector as part of solutions that we really need to take to address the climate crisis. So while he mentioned that positive innovation is important, he also was really keen to emphasize how reducing our own emissions is key, but very significantly as well, and I don't think we hear much about this, is the importance of encouraging fossil fuel providers to decarbonize so we can get to a net zero pledge. During the panel session, which followed on, and which was chaired by David Susser from from ICT Development Associates and the steering committee as well, we heard a lot about how important it is to root our learning and our response to the crisis in expertise from climate science. The importance of not framing the discussion in binary ways as either technology will solve all our problems or technology is the cause of all our problems. We really need to connect to experts outside our sector, as I said, and explore solutions which are, more understanding of that, a more complex framing. There were examples of importance of promoting open data standards and how key that is to ensuring sustainable digital technologies and expanding the life cycle of products, and the importance of seeing the internet as well as a forum for discussion and exchange. So I think that leads on really nicely to what I'm going to summarize, which is looking forward to the global IGF, which is also going to be online. That can also be a forum and will be for us to share these ideas, when it comes to AI, about the importance of interoperable data standards, sharing best practices on all of these different types of tools, which I mentioned, seeking, more examples and of how, you can best underpin algorithmic processes with all those principles which have been discussed in the session yesterday, but sharing and connecting with others from around the world on that topic is going to be really key. And the same goes to the internet and the environment. I think it's an early discussion topic, or it's the first time it was discussed at the UK IGF, and it's going to continue to be a really important topic. And we need to keep discussing the role that we can play as a tech sector in changing what we are currently doing, which is just going to lead us to a very disastrous place for our species and the ecosystem upon which we depend. So let's continue the conversation at the global IGF. I think we have a lot to take, and we can connect these ideas and learn from each other there. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Sheetal. And I think a lot of the themes that emerged in the first and second days have definitely appeared in today's sessions as well. We kicked off with Yi Chong from Ofcom to touch on kind of the current nature of the internet. And I think what was kind of common throughout today was looking at where we're at now and where we're going to be in the future. So we heard from Yi Chong about kind of the rise of internet usage during COVID and how our habits have changed and how they're likely to continue to change and evolve and accelerate these trends that we've seen. And I think that's something that kind of kept coming up throughout the day, and I saw in other sessions as well, really about how COVID has really accelerated patterns and behaviors and themes that we've seen that we thought were going to happen maybe on a 5-year timescale, happening in a much, much closer one. Also heard from Yi Chong about how industry came together at the beginning of the crisis to really address some of the most urgent needs. So these were around the infrastructure. So you saw streaming services reduce bit rate in order to make sure that we all kind of had access to the technology that we need, but also how these changes are changing what we might need from the internet. So looking at the universal service obligation, and typically a lot of focus being on download speeds and not on upload. But in this new reality where lots of people are on video conferences like this at the same time in the same household, actually that can put a lot of pressure on upload speeds and how we need to improve those. Later in the morning, we also had a session on the role of the internet fueling the post-COVID recovery. And we had some great voices here from kind of political sector, industry, and third sector as well. And really, the themes that you've picked on really came through here as well. So discussing how the digital divide is affecting the economic recovery, how crucial it is that people have access to the training and skills that they need in order to make the most of opportunities. Looking beyond the individuals to businesses as well, and how they can improve their productivity, not thinking when we think about tech businesses or tech skills as startups or exclusively kind of the largest companies, but what companies can do to digitize their accounting procedures, what they can do to help track their supply chains, small things that can make quite a substantive difference to kind of small and medium-sized companies. And then we also heard from Colville Ranger, who talked about the importance of bringing the public along on this journey, making sure that they have a feel in that, feel like they have a say and ownership. So, they really need to be a part of this change rather than, the perception that it's being imposed upon them. Give them a voice in how and when it is used. And it's with this confidence and it's with this control that people feel that we can really make the most of the opportunities that will be on offer, which I think, given the broader theme around trust, was just really quite relevant. We also touched on the importance of infrastructure. So not just the physical infrastructure that I mentioned before, although that is key, but also the social one. So digital skills and making sure that people, have the skills and confidence to go and drive forward online. And on that point, we kind of focused in on whose responsibility was it to drive those digital skills. So is it government? Is it industry? Is it the third sector? And ultimately, I think, we landed at it's everyone's responsibility. It's a hybrid of that. We all need to come together. And I think now is an important opportunity to do so more than ever. Looking at the discussion from the session, from the keynote, and kind of what you've touched on as well, how COVID has accelerated the use and understanding of technology came through time and again. The importance of building and sustaining trust with the public, again, a major theme, as well as kind of digital skills and awareness and really driving that forward. I think the final thing I'd say is, and what's so good about the UK IGF and the global IGF, is this was made possible because of this multi-stakeholder approach and getting these range of views. This really is a collaboration, and we need to have everyone's views reflected in these conversations. So systems and processes and rules and regulations reflect that range of views and, really are suited for the future.
Okay, well, thanks very much for this, Ben. So now we've had an outlook of the 3 days and some of our points, and I note that there are a number of questions in the questions pod. And the first one, of course, I let my colleagues jump in as they wish to as well. The first question is from Dave Meisel. Do you see room for collaboration of the UK Cybersecurity Council when formed next year? Now, the UK IGF is not an organization per se, like the British Computer Society or the IEEE or IET or an organization that effectively has members and so on. The UK IGF is really a group that is convened by Nominet to once a year have a multi-stakeholder discussion at a local level, at a national level, that will feed into the global IGF. And of course, every year, I guess the committee has a number of calls and has to put together a program from the various sources and from the various people that take part, thinking of two main things. One, it's going to be an interesting program. And two, it shouldn't be repetitive. So we're not going to get the same discussions going on year. So I guess that we're always looking for new ideas and new collaborations, certainly when it comes to speakers as well. And I have to thank, of course, the crew who finds all these speakers every year and this variety of speakers. And this year, I must particularly salute them for the fact that we've had very balanced panels. I think we've been told in the past it was too male dominated. This year, I think one or two panels might have been very female. So effectively, yes, we're always trying to find new ideas and new topics, and cybersecurity is one of those topics that is, of course, extremely important. So I'm sure that there will be opportunities in the future to work with the Cybersecurity Council, or certainly get some speakers that will come out of that council. It's not a promise, but it's a case of, like, I'm sure that will be happening. There's a second question which I earmarked as being happy to answer, and that's one from George Chiesa. And it says, given wet markets, global warming, GM food intensive farming with antibiotics resistance, more new pandemics are possible and even likely. Quite a doomsday way of looking at the future. Never mind the next COVID-19 wave. How about preparing for a new normality of new different virus pandemics appearing regularly due to global issues? And I guess that the part of this, I don't think we can do anything as a community when it comes down to all of the research that has to take place to try and counter these global pandemics. It is very possible indeed, just only by the very fact that we live in a world where people travel and so viruses can travel, that we will have future pandemics like the one that we've seen so far. The theory has now become practice. That being said, though, at our level, with regards to the internet, as people that are involved in the internet and in internet governance, we should be trying to make sure that the internet we have today is able to mitigate the economic impacts and the social impacts that these problems are bringing and thrusting towards us as a population on the whole. And I guess that COVID-19 has shown us some of the limitations that the current internet has, but also some of the successes that the current internet has. In March, we were told, oh, the internet will collapse because of the increased amount of traffic around the world, and it hasn't collapsed, because at the end of the day, we've seen that the fact that it's not centrally run or centrally controlled, that it's so distributed among so many different service providers, it's been very resilient, perhaps even some people finding it more resilient than they thought it was. And this is a success. So we need to capitalize on the successes, but at the same time, we can also see some of the shortcomings that the internet has, certainly with regards to local access. So if we can work towards resolving those problems, then perhaps we will be more prepared or better prepared next time for this successive waves that we might have in the future, and certainly even other challenges as well. But one that does, coming back to our discussion, one thing that does concern me was what we discussed yesterday, the fact that we rely on the internet so much, and yet it is so energy intensive, and it's resource consuming, and that's a real concern also, because ultimately pandemics might be nothing compared to what global warming might be. I don't know if any of my colleagues wish to add on this.
Not on that question. I did spot one from Arthur Virgo on what kind of regulatory frameworks should be established to address disruptive technologies leading to change before unintended consequences are known. I think that's a really good question. I guess a starting point is that disruptive technologies operate within a market in the first place. So there is an existing framework that can be built upon or used. So if you are launching a fintech company, then obviously the FCA will have a particular interest in you. We heard from Ofcom earlier, and if you're operating in terms of content questions, then Ofcom will certainly have an interest in you as well. So you are operating within a specific framework. But I think one of the most important principles here is having horizontal frameworks in place. So that could be e-commerce directive from a European level. But I think just having those horizontal frameworks is important, and we're seeing that more and more with government regulation and government action. So lots of work done recently on security by design, looking at the IoT market. So those are lots of individual disruptive technologies that could present unintended consequences for your fridge, or I think the toothbrush was brought up earlier. But if we create a framework so that security questions are thought of by design, then we can assure that all of those unintended consequences are thought through before they're implemented. And I think that is the best way to go, rather than a kind of, whack-a-mole approach where you're looking at specific applications of technology, then trying to create a framework for each one, but focusing on that horizontal framework. I don't know if anyone else has anything to raise on that.
Yes, thanks, Ben, and thanks, Arthur, for the question. I agree with you, Ben, that we need to work with existing commitments and frameworks in order to ensure that we are using and deploying technologies in a way that serves society and that serves people. So there is, of course, the human rights framework. And that's really, really important now as we face so many challenges, including unknown ones, like you mentioned. So I think, you know, it will be a mix. There will be a need for binding regulation, directives, like Ben mentioned, as well as guidance and best practice and voluntary standards. And that mix needs to be right. And when it's not in place, we see what happens when certain technologies are used, but that regulatory framework is not in place. And we've seen that with the rush to implement facial recognition systems that came up quite a lot yesterday in the algorithmic transparency session. You know, in certain countries where the deployment of that has been premature, it's had to be rolled back because the deployment violates existing commitments, and it's premature to deploy them. So that needs to be considered, you know, from the outset, and inclusive discussions which involve all stakeholders are key to that. Someone also said on the panel yesterday about examining algorithmic transparency, that just because we can doesn't mean we should. So it's important to consider the role of these technologies in, you know, the broader society and broader context. And luckily, like I said, we do have our human rights framework as a reference point throughout this, but it will always be a mix, I think. And with that, I'll hand back to you, Olivier. Or we have some other questions, perhaps.
Yeah, thanks, Sheetal. There are a number of other questions still. I think we kind of are running out of time. There was one which asks each panelist to take one, if each panelist had to take one thing with them to the global IGF, what would it be? What I was going to do is, I guess we can close the queue now, since we do need to be off the air in about 4 minutes. But there was one more question from Neil Fairbrother. Privacy, safety, and security aren't the same. Can we achieve a secure and safe space for children, in particular online, without compromising privacy, such as essential encryption? How can this circle be squared? I'm not sure if any of us, I certainly am not so knowledgeable about this topic, so.
Thanks. I can take a quick go at that, even though we only have 3 minutes left. I'll keep it to 1 minute. I think the answer to that is yes, definitely. And the starting point has to be something much more understanding of the role of safety and security, or rather encryption, in guaranteeing safety and security, not just for those of us who rely on it, you know, every single day, but because our society is so dependent on digital technology, it's really, really key to keep it secure, and encryption is essential for that. It's also essential for children. And there are a number of ways that we can address child sexual abuse material that ensures that we can maintain that security that we so need, because we're so dependent on digital technology, while addressing those issues. Happy to share more information on that, more materials on that after this, but I'll leave it there for now.
Yeah, I don't have too much more to add to that, but I guess in terms of the theme that I would take to the global IGF, it would really be around the acceleration of change that we've seen over the last, I guess, 6 months now, particularly since COVID. There are challenges that remain the same and that we knew were challenges beforehand, but the timelines to address those has rapidly changed. So we knew that we needed to upskill the nation in basic and advanced digital skills, but we're seeing at the moment both, you know, workplaces having to move online, but also greater levels of employment. And I think how we upskill that population is going to be a major challenge. So for me, it's really around how the timelines have shifted and what we need to do to address that.
Okay, well, thanks for this. What my takeouts for the to the global IGF are, I think one thing that really struck in my mind was the speech of the minister regarding well, what was going on with the internet, and one of the things that she really reiterated was the UK's commitment behind a multi-stakeholder distributed governance of the internet. And in the days when today we are seeing other so-called models coming out from various parts of the world, and certainly more open questioning about how the internet runs today and how it should be more controlled, more secured, more, they don't never use the word censored, but it's a cleaner. There you go, make it more clean, etc. This commitment towards multi-stakeholder processes and towards the IGF was particularly important, certainly coming from a country like the UK. And I just wish that other countries would also commit openly without reservation in this sort of way. Of course, the other discussions are really great. There were a lot of local discussions, but that for me was the key thing, which on the whole I wanted to convey. So it looks like we're reaching the end of this year's IGF, UK IGF. I wanted to thank in particular a number of people. Now I'm going to, if I do the whole list, we'll probably miss some people. So first, I think Alexander Birchhill and his crew at Fleischmann, Hilliard, Fishburne. Well done, you know, for really having helped this one through. It's not the first year. It's one in a multiple number of years now that you've worked on this project. So it's I think it's been really great. Of course, the whole crew at Nominet, Nick, Rowena, etc. You guys are just amazing in spending so much time on this, which at the end of the day is not going to make you any money whatsoever. In fact, it's quite costly, but it's something that is so important for the community. Thanking the sponsors. I know there are a handful of sponsors. I mean, you probably know them. They're listed, and we are, by the way, looking for more in-kind or financial sponsorship, so that the cost of all this UK IGF doesn't just rest on a couple of shoulders. So if your organization is interested in sponsoring next year's UK IGF, whether it will be online or whether it will be face-to-face, and trust me, online is not cheaper, or not at all cheaper than face-to-face. So, you know, there's still lots of costs. So please get in touch with UK IGF. The email is on the website. And of course, I'd like to thank all the speakers that have been really great. Nobody gets paid to speak at UK IGF. And when you look sometimes at other meetings where speakers ask for thousands and thousands of pounds fees just to speak for half an hour, you really realize the great chance that we have to have such a caliber of speaker with us, because they all think this is for a great cause. And of course, thanking all of the people that took part in the discussions, that joined us for these 3 days. We really would like your feedback. There is, I think, an email address, or maybe if I can ask someone to type the email address in the chat for your feedback. The committee will, of course, take a few days break, maybe 24 hours, and then start really hard to prepare for next year's UK IGF. And of course, the messages from London will be typed up and put together so as to convey these to the rest of the world in the IGF, the global IGF that will take place in November. Sheetal, Ben, any other words you wanted to add? No? Okay, excellent. Well, I think that's it for this year. So thanks to everyone, and follow up with the emails, and let's continue the dialogue online and at the global IGF. Thank you. Have a very good morning, afternoon, evening, or night. I love saying that. Thanks. Bye-bye.